Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is April 18th, 2026, and we are in Chapter 4 of my book, The Breath War. It is free. You can download it online. You can go to jamescarner.com, or you can go to Rumble and check out last night's episode of The Breath War. What are we calling it? Narration, part 1, and this is part 2. So, we're just going to go straight into it. No commercials, no nothing, because I think it's important that people get to listen to the entire book, all right? And it's going to take us a couple of days. And yes, Boots Hafner gives us a great idea. Boots, one of our listeners, says, hey, do me a favor, please hit that like button. If you can hit the X button with me, hit thumbs up. That would be great. That'll help the show. And thank you to all of our listeners, guys, the live chat Rumble Warriors. Guys, I love you all. Thank you so much. All right, let's get into it. It's another 2 hours of talk. Chapter 4, The Serpent's Legal Strategy, Substitution as the Core of the Codex, the Counterfeit Tree of Knowledge. In Genesis 2:16 through 17, God issued a singular legal command to Adam. Of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. This command was not arbitrary. It was the establishment of a jurisdictional boundary, a legal containment over breath, dominion, and authority. The tree of life represented sustained union with God under his breath issuance. The tree of knowledge of good and evil represented a boundary man was never authorized to cross, the boundary of self-sovereign legal determination. By offering this command, God placed the very breath of man under the covering of obedience. As long as man obeyed, his breath remained fully contained within heaven's registry. Dominion was secured through alignment, not independence. The legal bait of the adversary. The serpent understood that he could not forcibly steal breath or dominion. He had no legal standing to make such a claim. But he recognized that if man could be induced to reach for self-authorized knowledge, he would legally breach his containment. The temptation of Eve was not simply about eating. It was about jurisdictional transfer of legal authority. The serpent's words in Genesis 3:5 reveal the heart of the counterfeit system. It says, "For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." This was the offer: access to independent I always have trouble with these words. Adjudication of law. Man choosing to become his own legislator, determining good and evil apart from the breath giver. The tree of knowledge was therefore not merely about moral awareness. It was the assertion of a counterfeit legal system into creation. In eating, Adam and Eve agreed to participate in unauthorized legal self-governance, severing their breath from full containment and exposing their dominion to external legal petitions. The counterfeit tree as legal system. The tree of knowledge became the blueprint for the adversary's entire counterfeit kingdom. First, self-sovereign law. Man determining truth without submission to the Creator. This is the foundation of every false religion, occult system, and Luciferian doctrine. Second, alternative jurisdiction. The creation of competing legal systems that claim authority independent from God, including Babylonian law, Canaanite blood rituals, Egyptian mystery religions, Roman imperial law, Vatican canon law, and modern international maritime law systems. Third, breath fragmentation mechanism. By severing breath alignment from divine registry, the tree of knowledge introduced permanent vulnerability for breath to be petitioned, harvested, and trafficked by principalities. Fourth, economic engine. The adversary's breath economy, polarity management, division harvesting, and blood contracts rests entirely on the legal breach initiated at the tree. Fifth, gate to the hybrid agenda. The tree of knowledge laid the foundation for genetic corruption in Genesis 6 by establishing man's consent to redefine boundaries previously assigned solely to God, including creation itself. The tree was not simply one event. It was the opening of an entire counterfeit courtroom. Every throne of darkness since has argued its petitions upon the original legal fracture. The counterfeit tree manifested in the modern age. The tree of knowledge system remains fully operational today, manifesting across multiple dimensions. In governments, self-legislated governments that reject divine law. In science, transhumanism, gene editing, and artificial life, man acting as creator. In medicine, pharmakeia systems that override natural design. In finance, monetary structures that redefine value apart from divine stewardship. In education, knowledge systems that elevate human intellect above revealed wisdom. In religion, ecumenical movements that merge all beliefs into man-centered moral relativism. Every one of these systems flows from the tree's original offer. You shall be as God, knowing good and evil. The breath war and the tree's continuing legal battle. Even today, the adversary brings accusations to the courts of heaven built upon the tree's original contract. They chose to rule themselves. They consented to knowledge apart from you. Their breath belongs to me, is what Satan is saying. Well, every time humanity consents to redefine life, identity, or truth apart from the Creator, new legal filings are entered into the ongoing breath war litigation. The adversary feeds on these new contracts to maintain his counterfeit dominion. Christ as the legal counter-tree. Christ's work on the cross was the legal reversal of the tree's jurisdiction. Where Adam unlawfully reached for knowledge, Christ submitted fully to the Father's will, even unto death. His submission reinstated divine jurisdiction over breath and restored the legal alignment of dominion. The cross becomes, in essence, the tree of life restored. Where the first tree introduced fragmentation and self-rule, the cross introduced legal restoration, surrender, and reunification of breath within God's containment. In Revelations 22:2, the tree of life reappears as the ultimate legal symbol of fully restored governance. It says, the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. This reveals that the breath war will conclude with all nations brought back under divine registry, healed from the fragmentation initiated by the tree of knowledge. The ecclesia's authority against the counterfeit tree. The ecclesia must approach spiritual warfare knowing that most of the adversary's authority rests on mankind's continued consent to the counterfeit tree system. Every contract, covenant, and legal claim can be nullified by bringing breath identity back under Christ's registry covering. In prayer, repentance, and courtroom petition, the remnant dissolves these breath contracts, closes the legal breaches, and denies the adversary his courtroom filings. The power of the tree of knowledge can only be broken by returning to the jurisdiction of the tree of life. Gnostic inversion, knowledge over grace. At its heart, the breath war has always been a battle over jurisdiction. Whether man's breath remains under heaven's registry through surrender, grace, or whether man seeks divine status through self-governed knowledge, lawlessness. Gnosticism represents the adversary's attempt to theologically weaponize the tree of knowledge fracture, institutionalizing it into an entire counterfeit system that merges legal rebellion with spiritual vocabulary. Where the serpent first offered Eve unauthorized knowledge, Gnosticism emerges after the cross as the adversary's courtroom strategy to keep mankind tethered to the breath war breach while appearing to offer advanced spiritual enlightenment. Gnosticism is the spiritual maturation of the tree of knowledge, the merger of intellectual assent, secret illumination, and counterfeit salvation apart from grace. The legal mechanism behind Gnostic inversion. The core inversion of Gnosticism is the replacement of grace-based identity with knowledge-based ascension. In courtroom terms, this inversion performs several legal functions for the adversary. First, registry bypass attempt. Gnosticism teaches that salvation is achieved through hidden knowledge, self-revelation, or secret mysteries. We learned this from the Freemasonry movement. Attempting to bypass registry restoration through Christ's blood by appealing to man's intellectual capacity. Second, self-justification contracts. The Gnostic seeks legal standing through personal enlightenment rather than surrender to Christ's atonement. Generating self-sovereign breath claims that the adversary can petition his legal breaches. Third, perpetuation of the knowledge fracture. Instead of closing the Edenic breach, Gnosticism permanently extends it by keeping man bound to intellectual striving, deepening his legal vulnerability to breath fragmentation. Fourth, counterfeit sonship. Gnosticism promises divine status, hidden godhood, and inner divinity, offering the very lie of Genesis 3:5 in more sophisticated language. This crafts legal arguments in the courts of heaven that man has voluntarily consented to participate in the adversary's counterfeit kingdom. The Gnostic formula of legal inversion. The adversary's breath war strategy through Gnosticism follows a very specific legal formula. Knowledge to self-ascension, to self-righteousness, to legal breach, to petitional breath fragments, then to kingdom expansion. By persuading man to pursue knowledge as the pathway to divinity, rather than grace through surrender, the adversary maintains continuous breath jurisdiction over billions who, while spiritually active, are legally unregistered in heaven's courts. The evolution of Gnostic structures and world systems. Though often thought of as an early Christian heresy, Gnosticism's legal structure exists today across nearly every domain of the adversary's kingdom. In the occult orders, through secret societies, Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, Kabbalah, Theosophy, all operate on the Gnostic inversion. Esoteric knowledge as the key to ascend spiritual ladders. In New Age religions, ascension teachings, cosmic downloads, and inner divine awakening substitute grace. What we're seeing today through people who claim they're talking to the intergalactic, brothers from space. In academia, the exaltation of intellectual superiority as a form of self-determination over objective truth. In scientific transhumanism, the pursuit of technological omniscience or AI brain uploading gene editing as a replacement for grace-driven immortality. In church corruption, the infiltration of Christianity itself with doctrines that place personal revelation, hidden mysteries, or elite prophetic access over the simplicity of the cross. Every system that elevates knowledge as salvation operates under the breath war's Gnostic inversion. Why Gnostic inversion is so legally effective? Well, the danger of Gnosticism is its ability to appear spiritual while remaining lawless. It offers man a counterfeit form of the registry without actually securing legal breath containment under Christ's covering. The adversary presents this as courtroom evidence. For example, he would say, "They have pursued knowledge rather than my blood. They have chosen to ascend without my son. They stand as self-sovereign rulers of their own breath." Well, wait, would God say that? That's what God would have said. But he's saying that to the enemy, but that's not from the Bible. But that's something that God would say. The more humanity participates in Gnostic contracts, the more fragmented breath jurisdictions accumulate, which the adversary uses to file new dominion petitions in the courts of heaven. Now, Christ as the superior legal remedy to Gnostic inversion. The cross is the supreme legal answer to Gnostic inversion because it requires the opposite transaction. Not knowledge, but surrender. Not secret mysteries, but open covenant. Not intellectual assent, but legal adoption through blood. Ephesians 2:8-9 anchors this plainly. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. Well, this is not simply doctrinal. It is legal courtroom language. The ecclesia's standing is secured not by intellectual achievement, but by legal blood covering that nullifies every Gnostic petition the adversary may bring. The ecclesia's role in dismantling Gnostic structures. The remnant ecclesia must operate from courtroom clarity, recognizing that every form of knowledge-based salvation is a breath war trap. Intercessory warfare, courtroom petitions, and generational contract dissolutions must actively identify and nullify Gnostic covenants in bloodlines, churches, governments, and personal identities. By bringing these covenants under Christ's registry covering, the adversary's Gnostic structures lose legal standing, and breath jurisdiction is restored to the Father. The final judgment of Gnostic thrones. At the final courtroom, the Gnostic thrones will face full legal collapse. The secret societies, occult priesthoods, and Luciferian illuminists who have traded breath for knowledge will lose all dominion. The transhumanist priesthood who pursued immortality apart from Christ will see their synthetic vessels destroyed. The religious elites who led others into breath-fragmenting knowledge systems will face the consequences of their inverted gospel. Only those whose breath stands under grace will remain registered in the Lamb's Book of Life. Sin defined as awakening, not rebellion. From the very beginning, sin was presented by the adversary not as a crime against divine law, but as an opportunity for awakening. The serpent's offer to Eve in Genesis 3:5 was not, hey, rebel against your creator, but rather, you shall surely not die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Here, the foundation for the adversary's courtroom deception was laid, redefining rebellion as enlightenment. The adversary has never truly denied God's existence. Instead, he repositions sin as a form of graduation, suggesting that man evolves when he breaks divine boundaries, calling the trespass awakening. This redefinition allows the breath war to continue indefinitely because under this deception, man will consent to legal breaches while believing he is ascending in legal maturity. The legal mechanics of this inversion. The adversary's courtroom's argument is not primarily built on overt rebellion, but on voluntary consent to an alternative legal system. By redefining sin as awakening, first, consent is secured. Humanity willingly steps into breath-fragmenting contracts thinking they are progressing. Second, registry breach is maintained. By pursuing breath sovereignty apart from God, man remains outside the protection of the registry covering. Third, legal filings are strengthened. The adversary presents humanity's voluntary contracts as evidence. They have not rejected you out of hostility, but out of their pursuit of higher knowledge. They chose self-sovereign breath governance. That's what it says in the Bible. Fourth, fragmented breath continues to accumulate. As man participates in spiritual awakening, breath is continually fractured into petitionable fragments. Historical evolution of sin is awakening. The adversary has applied this redefinition across every major breath war domain. In Gnosticism, knowledge as the pathway to divinity rather than repentance, through grace. In Luciferianism, the rebellion of Lucifer, reframed as noble resistance against tyranny, Lucifer as the light bearer, not the criminal. We've seen this through Albert Pike's works. In Eastern mysticism, loss of personal identity, or nirvana, becoming one with the cosmic consciousness, reframes sin not as disobedience, but as ignorance of divine selfhood. In New Age teachings, Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky, awakening is achieved by transcending religious dogma, releasing oneself from guilt, and embracing inner godhood. In transhumanism, the pursuit of technological immortality is framed as man's rightful evolutionary leap, not rebellion against the Creator's design for life, death, and resurrection. In modern secular humanism, moral relativism replaces absolute law. Personal truth becomes higher than objective obedience. In AI and digital merging, consciousness uploads, neural integration, and synthetic identity are framed as the next step in humanity's awakening. A full return to self-sovereign breath apart from divine issuance. Each of these domains preserves the same courtroom argument. They chose knowledge over surrender. The core legal argument the adversary files. In the heavenly courts, the adversary's petitions are not based solely on man's wickedness, but on man's voluntary participation in counterfeit ascension. You offered them registry restoration, but they declined. They chose illumination instead of submission. They signed contracts by awakening by their own free will. Well, this allows the adversary to continually file jurisdictional claims over fragmented breath territories, extending his domain as man willingly feeds the breath economy. The breath war linked to the tree of knowledge. This reframing of sin is directly tied to the Edenic fracture. The tree of knowledge did not simply represent law breaking. It was marketed as divine upgrade. The adversary has been replicating that marketing ever since. Adam's initial failure was not framed as rebellion in his mind. It was framed as access to withheld knowledge. Every generation since has faced the same offer. You are being kept from your potential. You will evolve if you step beyond his restrictions. This is not rebellion, it is your birthright. Well, the true nature of sin, according to the courts of heaven. Heaven's legal system defines sin very differently. Sin equals unauthorized jurisdictional breach of divine law. The issue is not whether man intends rebellion, but whether breath fragments are released through violation of covenantal authority. Every act outside of registry containment triggers legal vulnerability, regardless of motive or self-perceived awakening. The legal remedy in Christ. The cross is the full courtroom interruption to the adversary's awakening narrative. Jesus' work reframes legal standing entirely. Not knowledge, but blood. Not awakening, but surrender. Not self-elevation, but legal adoption. Not breath ownership, but breath returned to the registry under the sun. Ephesians 2:8-9 remains the permanent legal formula. It says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves as the gift of God, not of works, so that no one may boast." Well, the boast of Gnostic inversion is precisely what the courtroom of heaven rejects. Grace eliminates all self-ascension contracts. The ecclesia's role in breaking awakening contracts. The remnant ecclesia must dismantle these legal contracts at their roots. In personal prayer, renounce every form of knowledge-based identity. In bloodline deliverance, break inherited Gnostic and occult awakening covenants. In intercession, petition for registry restoration through Jesus Christ's superior legal standing. In teaching, expose every breath war doctrine that redefines sin as awakening. By doing so, the adversary's filings lose standing, breath fragments are restored, and registry alignment is reestablished under the authority of Jesus Christ. The final adjudication. At the final courtroom judgment, every soul standing on the claim of awakening apart from Jesus Christ will be presented as standing outside registry containment. The book will be opened, Revelation 20:12, and all self-sovereign awakenings will collapse under the absolute registry ownership of the Lamb. The breath war formula of this inversion is as follows: awakening, then self-governance, then registry breach, then fragmented breath, then legal petition, then Luciferian dominion. Well, Christ's formula is this: surrender, then blood covering, then registry restoration, then breath containment, then petition nullification, then kingdom authority. Legal fraud, substitution of divine breath protocols. At the foundation of creation, breath issuance was never designed to be transferable, replicable, or alterable. Genesis 2:7 reveals that only the Father holds jurisdiction to breath life into flesh. And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Well, this divine breath issuance constitutes the original protocol, the system of legal identity, registry enrollment, occupancy authorization, and jurisdictional dominion. The adversary, who cannot create breath, has always sought one thing: to substitute God's breath issuance with his own counterfeit protocols. This is the very essence of legal fraud. The attempt to simulate, replace, or override heaven's exclusive jurisdiction while appearing to operate within lawful frameworks. The nature of legal fraud in breath protocols. Legal fraud operates not by open force, but by imitation of legitimate authority. The adversary's fraudulent breath protocols seek to achieve the following. First, mimicry of issuance, replicating the appearance of new life through synthetic, hybrid, or engineered vessels without divine breath issuance. Second, bypassing registry enrollment, generating occupants of the physical realm who bypass heaven's registry and operate as illegal or unregistered breath containers. Third, subversion of dominion, placing these unauthorized vessels into rulership positions, allowing fallen thrones to govern physical creation by proxy. Fourth, jurisdictional fog, creating legal ambiguity that complicates petitionable claims in the heavenly courts, requiring complex adjudication. Fifth, harvestable breath economy, exploiting fragmented breath from existing restraints to fuel and sustain the operation of these counterfeit vessels. Historic development of breath protocol substitution. The adversary has implemented multiple stages of legal fraud across history. The Nephilim in Genesis 6, the first great fraud. The Watchers trespassed into breath creation by injecting fallen seed into human bloodlines. The hybrids carried breath through human mothers but operated under corrupted legal occupancy, creating the first hybridized breath vessels. Occult priesthoods and bloodline monarchies, or the bloodlines of hybrid seed, were preserved through elite royal families, secret priesthoods, and occult thrones, acting as breath proxies for fallen thrones that could not legally embody themselves. Through demonic possession, disembodied Nephilim spirits sought access to human bodies as hosts, created layering occupancy fraud where foreign spirits manipulate legal breath containers without lawful issuance. Religious systems of substitution. The adversary engineered false religious systems: Baal, Moloch, Babylon, Gnosticism, Vatican canon law, Kabbalah, and Luciferian orders, which claim spiritual authority while offering counterfeit breath doctrines that bypass the registry restoration offered through Christ. The technological phase, the modern era, well, the fraud has advanced into biotechnology, transhumanism, and AI. CRISPR gene editing manipulates breath vessels at the genetic level, attempting to overwrite divine design. Synthetic embryos and laboratory-grown life forms aim to create fully artificial vessels, bypassing breath issuance entirely. Neural linkage and brain-machine interfaces open non-breath channels of spiritual influence, creating hybrid access points. Artificial intelligence and digital avatars function as synthetic pseudo-souls, offering counterfeit identity containers. The adversary's legal fraud machine is now nearing its most dangerous form, a fully operational synthetic breath system capable of hosting non-breath spiritual occupants without human biological containment. The core legal argument of substitution. In the heavenly courtroom, the adversary argues, they no longer need your breath. They have chosen their own life-creating systems. They have engineered vessels outside your issuance. Their dominion is mine by contract and consent. Well, the legal fraud is not hidden. It is presented as man's consent to alternative breath protocols justified through science, enlightenment, self-governance, and technological evolution. The critical difference between divine and fraudulent breath protocols. There are 5 divine protocols and 5 fraudulent protocols. One is issued directly by the Father. The fraudulent is manufactured through fallen intervention. 2 is registered in heaven's breath registry, where the fraudulent is unregistered or fraudulently petitioned vessels. 3, contained by covenant covering, which the fraud is fragmented, vulnerable to spiritual corruption. 4 is governed by obedience and surrender, and the fraud is governed by consent-based legal manipulation. And 5, restored only through Christ's blood, and the fraud is sustained through counterfeit covenants, blood rituals, and technological contracts. Why legal fraud is so dangerous to the breath war? Because legal fraud operates within imitation of lawful structures, it generates complex filings that require higher-level courtroom authority to dismantle. Fraudulent vessels may appear fully functional, even superior in power, yet remain entirely outside heaven's legal authorization. This allows the adversary to expand his dominion while remaining disguised under humanity's voluntary contracts. The ecclesia's role in dismantling breath fraud. The remnant must recognize these fraudulent breath protocols for what they are: illegal occupancy systems designed to bypass the registry of heaven. Spiritual warfare must focus on bloodline cleansing, severing hybrid and occult contracts, contract nullification, renouncing participation in counterfeit systems, courtroom petitions, appealing to the registry authority of Jesus Christ's blood to dissolve unauthorized vessels and dismantle legal filings. Expose breath fraud publicly. Reveal the spiritual fraud of transhumanism, AI, and hybridization agendas. The final judgment of substitution systems at the final courtroom session is the Nephilim hybrid systems will be dissolved, the AI-driven synthetic identity systems will be dismantled, the transhumanist breath override experiments will be terminated, the occult priesthood who preserved breath fraud will be stripped of all the thrones. Only breath vessels issued and restored under the Lamb will remain. So in a way, you could say that robots, transhumanism, us merging with machine is the new Nephilim. It won't be Nephilim because the fallen watchers, the 200 that we learn from the Ethiopian Bible and Enoch to Genesis 6 and the King James, that those 200 fallen angels are locked up into the pit until the day of judgment. Why this is the final breath war battle. The ultimate contest is not simply good versus evil, it is lawful breath versus fraudulent breath. The adversary seeks to permanently establish an alternative system of life that operates outside God's breath protocol, effectively attempting to build a permanent anti-registry civilization. Christ's return will collapse this legal fraud entirely, restoring full breath sovereignty to the Father alone. The breath war formula of legal fraud is as follows: fraudulent breath creation, unauthorized vessels, registry bypass, fragmented dominion, legal petition, and expansion, synthetic kingdom of darkness. Christ's counter formula is this: true breath issuance, legal containment, blood covering, registry restoration, petition notification, and kingdom of heaven established. Chapter 5, the breath war, how the serpent builds his energy economy. In the architecture of the breath war, one of the adversary's most sophisticated and ongoing strategies is breath theft through worship, trauma, fear, and consent. While murder and hybridization remain major legal breaches, these mechanisms function as daily operational systems that allow the adversary to continually fragment and harvest breath from humanity, feeding his breath economy and sustaining his courtroom petitions before heaven. Worship is the most ancient form of breath transfer. Breath was originally designed to return to the Father through worship, which legally seals breath within the registry. Every act of true worship strengthens breath containment under heaven's jurisdiction. But the adversary inverted this design by establishing counterfeit thrones that receive breath illegally. False worship, whether through idolatry, occult ceremonies, celebrity adoration, state reverence, or participation in alternative spiritual systems, becomes a legal contract in which man voluntarily transfers portions of his breath to unauthorized thrones. Each word, song, or ritual offered to these illegitimate systems is presented in the courts of heaven as lawful breath surrender, strengthening the adversary's claims. Trauma serves as one of the most violent forms of breath fragmentation. Extreme physical, emotional, or spiritual abuse causes victims, especially children, to fracture portions of their breath identity under overwhelming duress. Satanic ritual abuse, sexual violation, blood sacrifice, war atrocities, and generational betrayal are intentionally engineered by the adversary to create these fractures. When breath containers are shattered through trauma, fragments are siphoned into the breath economy, giving principalities increased access to souls. These fragmented breath pieces are then trafficked, assigned, or stored within demonic legal systems through blood altars and generational covenants, perpetuating multi-generational enslavement. Fear operates as a continuous low-grade siphon, producing steady, sustainable breath leakage over time. Fear triggers anxiety, self-preservation, dependency on pharmakia, and idolatry of safety, all of which generate spiritual discharge. Global fear campaigns, including plagues, economic collapses, wars, and media manipulation, are deliberately designed to maintain this state of breath instability. Even believers who allow fear to govern their decisions inadvertently release breath fragments into the adversary's economy, giving legal standing to his accusations. That humanity places more trust in his counterfeit system than in the covering of the Father. We see that because in America, who needs God when there's a hospital every 2 blocks? Consent is perhaps the most sophisticated and dangerous of all mechanisms. The adversary understands that voluntary agreements carry the highest legal authority in heaven's courts. Through covenants, contracts, and oaths, whether overt or subtle, humanity consents to breath transference on a daily basis. Joining occult organizations, secret societies, biometric registration systems, AI-based identity platforms, genetic modification programs, and virtual reality embodiment technologies all constitute legal breath contracts that allow the adversary to harvest and redirect breath jurisdiction. Even simple agreements made through words, habits, or entertainment choices, video games, you name it, often carry micro-contracts that surrender breath fragments under the breath war's legal structure. Together, these 4 systems, worship, trauma, fear, and consent, form a global breath siphoning network. The adversary uses this harvested breath to expand his dominion, strengthen his petitions, and fuel the counterfeit kingdom's growth. Every time humanity participates in these systems, whether knowingly or ignorantly, breath fragments are added to the adversary's treasury, giving him continual leverage in the courts of heaven. The cross of Christ directly dismantles each of these mechanisms. Through his blood, false worship contracts are dissolved and breath offerings are realigned to the Father. Trauma-based breath fractures are healed and reintegrated into proper containment. Fear is cast out through perfect love, sealing breath under peace. Consented covenants are nullified by the superior legal authority of Christ's sacrifice, which overwrites every fraudulent contract. The ecclesia's role, the ecclesia is you guys, the children of God, is to actively apply these legal remedies through bloodline cleansing, deliverance, covenant renunciation, deliverance, legal petitioning to the Father legally through deliverance, and intercessory courtroom action, again, deliverance. By confronting these legal breaches and petitioning for registry restoration, the remnant shuts down the adversary's breath economy and collapses his legal claims to jurisdiction. At the final courtroom judgment, every act of false worship, every trauma-based contract, every fear-driven agreement, and every consented petition will be fully adjudicated. Only those whose breath has been restored to the registry under Jesus' blood covering will remain. The breath war will conclude when every fragment is gathered back under the throne of the Father, and the counterfeit system that lived off of the fragmented breath will be fully dismantled forever. The battery model of breath fragmentation. The breath war is not only a legal system, it is an energy system. While breath functions as legal jurisdiction, it simultaneously functions as spiritual energy currency that powers both heaven's and the adversary's kingdoms. The adversary's inability to create breath forces him to operate on stolen, fragmented breath as his primary fuel source. This harvested breath is processed, stored, and distributed throughout his kingdom using what can be described as a battery model of breath fragmentation, a counterfeit energy grid designed to sustain the Luciferian dominion. At creation, breath was issued to man in a unified, contained vessel, the body, whole, stable, fully charged under God's covering. When man breached his covenant, that unified charge was shattered into fragmentable units, much like breaking a sealed energy cell into shattered, accessible components. From that moment forward, the adversary's dominion has depended on collecting, storing, and managing these breath fragments as the operational power behind his counterfeit throne. Why breath functions like a battery? Breath fragments carry several critical properties that make them valuable to the adversary's kingdom. First, energy density. Because breath was issued by God directly, even a single fragment retains trace jurisdictional power, authority, and creative potential. Second, transferability. Once detached from divine containment, breath fragments can be redirected and pooled by fallen thrones through legal petitions. Third, charge stability. Fragmented breath can remain charged as long as the illegal contracts sustaining its fragmentation remain active. This is through trauma, worship, fear, consent, and generational covenants. Fourth, utility. These charged fragments empower principalities, energize occult systems, sustain hybrid bloodlines, fuel ritual workings, and provide the power behind the beast's systems' technological engines. The adversary has spent millennia perfecting the harvesting, storage, and deployment of fragmented breath as an alternative energy economy, an energy infrastructure that sustains his entire legal kingdom while circumventing God's registry. The storage system, how the adversary builds breath batteries. Breath fragmentation is harvested and stored across multiple layers. Individual storage. Breath fragments detached through personal sin, trauma, and contracts are stored within demonic networks assigned to individual lives. Bloodline storage. Generational curses, blood pacts, and hybrid genetic entanglements collect breath fragments into family-based breath vaults, which are trafficked by occult bloodline managers. 3. National storage. Entire nations, through idolatry, bloodshed, and legal structures, create massive breath repositories assigned to territorial principalities. Number 4, global storage. Global systems, war, pharmakia, financial slavery, transhumanism, digital consent, all allow the adversary to store and move breath fragments in real time through data systems and occult rituals. 5, dimensional storage. Certain breath fragments are bound within spiritual vaults, prisons, astral structures, underworld domains, as long-term energy reserves used for ritual work, prophetic delays, and territorial domination. In every layer, these breath batteries remain fully legal in the courts of heaven until challenged and revoked through the superior petitions of Jesus' blood covering. How the breath battery powers the Luciferian system. The adversary applies these stored breath fragments into every operational system. Principalities use breath charges to expand spiritual jurisdiction. Hybrid bloodlines are strengthened and sustained through inherited breath charges. Occult rituals activated stored breath charges to open dimensional gates and summon spiritual entities. AI and quantum systems will ultimately attempt to run on breath-sourced data fields, transforming breath into digital identity fragments. Global governance uses breath charges to authorize policy, war, legislation, and economic domination. Without breath batteries, the Luciferian Kingdom collapses. His entire system is parasitic. It requires constant harvesting to remain operational. Why this model was necessary for the adversary? The adversary needed this model for three primary reasons. First, he cannot manufacture breath, and he has no sustaining self-energy source. Second, Jesus' blood severely restricted his legal ability to freely harvest breath post-Calvary, forcing him to rely increasingly on complex consent-based contracts. Third, as technologically advanced, his kingdom required larger energy surpluses, driving him toward digital identity systems that harvest breath on a mass automated scale. The breath battery model allows him to delay judgment by continually presenting active contracts as a legal standing in the courts of heaven. The ecclesia's role in discharging breath batteries. The remnant ecclesia possesses full legal authority to dismantle the battery system through courtroom petitions. Through identity, individual, generational, and national breath contracts, renounce and sever all breath fragmentation agreements, petition for full registry restoration under Christ's blood, call for the discharging of stored breath batteries, collapsing principality strongholds, reclaim breath fragments to their rightful registry position under the Lamb. Every time a breath battery is discharged through legal petition, the adversary's fuel supply shrinks, and his ability to sustain counterfeit dominion weakens. The final collapse of the breath battery system. At the appointed final courtroom judgment, every unredeemed breath fragment will be gathered, every stored charge will be discharged back to its lawful creator, every principality will lose its jurisdictional energy source, every hybrid throne and technological breath grid will collapse, and the breath economy will cease, and the registry will be fully restored under Jesus' dominion. The breath war formula of the battery system is as follows: breath fragmentation, storage, legal containment by fallen thrones, energy application, Luciferian dominion. Christ's counter formula is as follows: blood petition, battery discharge, registry restoration, jurisdiction collapse, kingdom of heaven established. Trafficking of breath fragments across generations. From the moment breath was issued to Adam, its legal nature was both individual and generational. Breath is not isolated to one lifetime. It carries a legal continuity through seed lines. This is why the adversary, unable to manufacture breath himself, developed a system of breath trafficking, the long-term transfer, consolidation, and manipulation of breath fragments across generations through legal covenants, bloodline contracts, and unresolved breaches. Every legal breach produces fragmented breath, portions of identity, dominion, and jurisdiction that, once severed from divine containment, remain vulnerable to external claims. The adversary understood early that these fragments could be gathered, stored, and reassigned through bloodlines as transferable legal property. The legal mechanics of generational breath trafficking. Breath trafficking operates by a set of strict legal principles. First, inheritance of contracts. Legal breath breaches, whether through idolatry, bloodshed, occult participation, or covenantal disobedience, are not automatically dissolved at death. The breath fragments attached to these contracts remain active in the bloodline unless formally revoked. Second, generational debt. Exodus 25 describes how the iniquity of the father is visited upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Well, this is not arbitrary punishment, but a legal description of how unresolved breath contracts remain attached to generational breath vessels as unpaid spiritual debt. Third, transfer of ownership. Through rituals, covenants, and oaths, occult systems and secret societies actively transfer breath fragments down family lines, consolidating them into powerful bloodline treasuries that sustain thrones of dominion. Fourth, cross-bloodline trading. The adversary not only stores breath within families, but trades breath fragments between bloodlines through marriage alliances, political pacts, priesthood initiations, and royal mergers, much like trafficking financial assets. Fifth, accumulation of breath wealth. Ancient bloodlines such as the Black nobility or Rothschild systems and hybrid monarchies, they all function as breath banks, multi-generational accumulators of fragmented breath, allowing the adversary to sustain long-term dominion through compounded jurisdiction. How breath fragments become trafficked. There are many gateways through which breath fragments enter the trafficking system: through ancestral sin, murder, idolatry, child sacrifice, sexual sin, rebellion, and covenant violations; through occult oaths, secret societies, initiations, Freemasonry, witchcraft, Luciferian priesthood, blood pacts, and ritual dedications; through aborted destinies, lives cut short through abortion or sacrifice where unfulfilled breath assignments remain unsettled; through curses and vows, spoken words, self-imposed agreements, and binding soul ties that create legal openings; through trauma fractures, abuse, betrayal, and generational trauma that release breath fragments involuntary. Once these fragments are severed, they are harvested into demonic treasuries, assigned to principality managers, and circulated through bloodline trading networks for centuries. The role of generational thrones in breath trafficking. The adversary uses human bloodlines as legal proxies to store and manage trafficked breath fragments. Elite families and royal priesthoods are assigned as breath vaults, houses where stolen breath accumulates through marriages, contracts, and rituals; breath distributors, families that birth rulers, occult leaders, and financiers who wield the accumulated breath authority; breath protectors, bloodlines tasked with maintaining its legal protection of breath holdings through generational covenant maintenance. This trafficking structure allows the adversary to maintain continuous dominion even when individuals die, as the breath fragments legally remain tied to the bloodline structure until formally revoked. The global impact of generational breath trafficking. The breath trafficking network is the unseen spiritual economy that empowers global banking systems built on bloodline contracts, secret society networks that manipulate politics, finance, and war, occult religious systems that maintain ritual authority over regions and nations, hybrid bloodline rulerships that act as thrones for disembodied principalities, technological dominions preparing for transhuman synthetic breath surrogates. The longer these generational contracts remain uncontested, the more breath authority compounds into the adversary's global dominion scaffolding. The legal remedy in Christ. The cross of Christ is the superior legal override to generational breath trafficking. His blood not only forgives individual sin, but dismantles bloodline breath contracts across generations. Galatians 3:13 declares that Christ redeemed us from the curses of the law, severing the legal continuity of inherited breath debt. Through proper legal petition and courtroom intercession, the ecclesia can identify ancestral breath contracts, renounce generational oaths and covenants, break bloodline assignments tied to hybrid or occult thrones, sever soul ties and ritual breath ownership claims, restore fragmented breath under the blood of the Lamb into registry containment. This is why the deliverance of individuals often involves bloodline disentanglement, reclaiming generations of stolen breath, fragments that have been trafficked for centuries. The final judgment of breath trafficking. At the end of the age, every unresolved breath fragment will be summoned back to its creator. The trafficked breath wealth stored in bloodline treasuries will be confiscated and nullified. The thrones of the black nobility and hybrid priesthoods will lose all breath authority. The adversary's breath economy will collapse completely, and the registry will be fully reconciled under Christ's permanent dominion. The breath war formula of breath trafficking is as follows: generational sin, breath fragmentation, bloodline storage, cross-bloodline trade, legal petition, expansion, Luciferian kingdom growth. Christ's counter formula is bloodline petition, contract renunciation, fragment reclamation, registry restoration, and kingdom of heaven enforcement. So hopefully by now you guys understand why the families or dynasties or bankers or, big corporations or countries are controlled, because they have so much power through the breath as they continue petitioning to God, and they get granted access over us. That's been the problem, because no one understands the breath war, and we can change this if we want. Legal limits of the system. God retains breath registry. From the moment God breathed into Adam, ownership of breath was never transferred away from the Creator. God alone remains the sovereign source, issuer, and legal owner of every breath ever released into creation. The breath registry, referenced throughout Scripture as the Book of Life, is not simply a symbolic record, but the Father's permanent property ledger, documenting every breath identity issued into the material realm. Even after the fracture of Eden, after the hybrid incursion of Genesis 6, after generational trafficking, bloodline corruption, and the rise of transhuman technologies, this one unchangeable fact remains. The adversary cannot create breath. He can only fragment, traffic, counterfeit, and temporarily manage stolen breath through legal petitions. Every fragment that has ever been severed still ultimately remains under the Father's registry authority. The adversary's entire counterfeit kingdom operates under license, functioning entirely on consent, petition, and fraud-based contracts, but never on original ownership. The breath fragments he manipulates remains fully recorded in heaven's registry, whether surrendered through worship or false gods, broken by trauma, stolen through fear, or traded across generations by consent. He cannot delete breath identities from the registry, nor can he produce new entries. His petitions depend entirely on human participation in legal breaches that give him temporary access to fragmented breath. Yet even these are subject to immediate collapse when proper legal appeal is made through Jesus Christ's blood covering. The breath registry operates under sovereign legal properties that the adversary cannot override. All breath remains God's possession, recorded immutably in heaven's administration. Any access the adversary gains is only through temporary consent-based breaches, which still sit under God's jurisdiction for ultimate judgment. He cannot sever breath from God's ownership. He can only argue for temporary jurisdiction when humans willingly enter his counterfeit contracts. Even after death, unresolved breath contracts remain attached to the registry awaiting proper adjudication. This legal sealing is why the adversary's kingdom remains dependent on breath fragmentation and trafficking across generations. Through ancestral sin, bloodline covenants, hybrid offspring, occult priesthoods, and global consent systems, breath fragments are accumulated into massive treasuries of stolen dominion. Yet all of it remains subject to registry audit at any moment. None of the breath wealth the adversary accumulates is ever fully outside God's oversight. His entire system operates like a shadow banking structure, able to move breath currency, but unable to mint any of his own. The work of Jesus on the cross stands as the supreme legal audit against this fraud. When Christ surrendered his perfect breath, free of sin, into death and reclaimed it through resurrection, he executed the legal authority to override every breath breach across all generations. Through his blood, the registry has the legal mechanisms by which any breath fragment, no matter how deeply entangled, can be restored into proper containment. The ecclesia, operating under this superior registry authority, has the right to dismantle every breath petition the adversary files, to sever every bloodline contract, and reclaim every trafficked breath fragment back into the Father's possession. At the appointed final courtroom judgment, the entire registry will be audited publicly. Every breath fragment will be summoned before heaven's throne. Unredeemed breath, still bound to the adversary's counterfeit system, will face permanent legal separation. Hybrid bloodlines, Nephilim vessels, synthetic bodies, and artificial breath surrogates will all collapse under Jesus' legal rule. The breath registry will be fully purified and sealed, no longer trafficked or contested, but fully reconciled under the Lamb's eternal dominion. The adversary's ultimate terror is not merely judgment itself, it is the permanent reminder that no breath has ever truly belonged to him. His entire counterfeit government exists only by exploiting breaches within a registry that remains entirely outside his control. Chapter 6: The Infrastructure of the Counterfeit Kingdom, Governmental Priesthood, Alice Bailey, and the Externalized Hierarchy. As the breath war progressed, the adversary's legal system evolved from mere theft and trafficking into organized administrative governance. Once sufficient breath fragmentation had accumulated through worship, trauma, fear, consent, hybridization, and generational bloodlines, the counterfeit kingdom began establishing a formal infrastructure to oversee the management of these spiritual resources. This became what Scripture often calls the thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. Within this infrastructure emerged the governmental priesthood, the managerial class of the adversary's system. One of the most open revelations of this system was published through Alice Bailey, the high Luciferian channel who codified the breath war's organizational structure in the early 20th century. Through Bailey's writings, particularly the externalization of the hierarchy, that was her book, the adversary revealed to his initiates the long-planned administrative systems by which his counterfeit dominion would be openly ruled on earth, preparing humanity to fully consent to the externalized hierarchy in the final stages of the breath war. Bailey was not inventing new doctrine. She was simply formalizing what the fallen hierarchy had already been executing secretly for millennia. She openly acknowledged her spirit guide, DeWal Cole, one of the Watcher's surviving spiritual agents, who dictated the framework of the counterfeit kingdom's legal government through channeling, like Bashar. This revelation was not metaphorical. It was a legal document disguised as esoteric wisdom, describing how breath management would transition from secretive occult control to public world governance. The externalized hierarchy, the Luciferian courtroom government. At the center of Alice Bailey's writings is the description of a layered spiritual bureaucracy, a hierarchy of thrones that function as the adversary's courtroom government, overseeing the management of fragmented breath. This hierarchy parallels God's original spiritual government, but operates entirely on stolen breath jurisdiction. Bailey describes, first, the Council of Shambhala, which she calls the center where the will of God is known. In truth, the counterfeit throne of Lucifer attempting to usurp registry authority. It is here that the highest level of breath contract manipulation is managed by the fallen. She also had a trust. A trust has money. A trust dishes out money for a cause. Well, her trust at first was called the Luciferian Trust. Now they call it Lucis to hide the name, Lucis, Lucis Trust, which is still in effect today. Second, the Masters of Wisdom, composed of hybridized bloodlines, ascended masters, disembodied Nephilim spirits, and fallen angels who administrate specific domains through finance, politics, education, religion, science, and media. Each governs a portion of breath economy through their specialized legal expertise. Third, the world disciples, the living human agents, through the black nobility bloodline, secret societies, occult priesthoods, and political elites, who serve as embodied proxies of the disembodied fallen hierarchy. These are the managers of breath trafficking on earth. Fourth, the initiates, those ascending through levels of Luciferian revelation who are gradually given greater legal access to breath contracts, occult knowledge, and dominion authority in exchange for deeper oaths. Fifth, the human masses, whose fragmented breath fuels the system through voluntary consent, fear, trauma, idolatry, and generational contract perpetuation. And in Alice Bailey's system, this hierarchy is not meant to remain hidden forever. The goal of externalization is to transition this invisible government into open world control, where the priesthood of the fallen fully administers the breath economy as the visible global government, the final beast system described in Revelation. How Bailey's externalized hierarchy connects to the breath war. The adversary's goal is to consolidate fragmented breath into a fully administered legal system where no breath fragment remains outside his management. The externalization of the hierarchy prepares humanity to openly consent to this counterfeit system, believing it is enlightened spiritual governance. In reality, it is the final legal structure of breath captivity, preparing the world to receive the beast's mark, where breath ownership will be tied to identity, currency, and worship simultaneously. Every sector of society already operates under early phases of this hierarchy through education, controlled by breath fragmented doctrines that sever children from registry alignment through identity confusion and intellectual sovereignty, through finance, managed by bloodline banking dynasties that traffic breath through generational debt slavery, through government, administered by hybridized proxies who hold breath jurisdiction through oaths and bloodline initiations, and through science and medicine, engineered to rewrite breath containers through genetic manipulation, transhumanist embodiment, and synthetic life protocols, through religion, corrupted through Gnostic inversion and ecumenical mergers that replace grace with enlightenment. Each of these pillars operates under the externalized hierarchy's legal supervision, managing the daily operations of breath harvesting, trafficking, and battery storage across nations. The legal danger of the externalized hierarchy. The great deception of Bailey's model is its presentation as an enlightened, unifying, and spiritual system. Yet every level operates on pre-existing breath contracts. Breath fragments that were originally issued by God but diverted into the adversary's treasury through deception. The adversary's courtroom filings rely heavily on this deception. It says they have been enslaved by force. They have willingly consented to my hierarchy, offered their breath and worship, and seek advancement under my initiates. Well, this legal framework allows the adversary to retain standing in the courts of heaven while advancing toward open global rule. Christ's legal supremacy over the externalized hierarchy. This legal remedy remains anchored in Jesus' superior blood covering. While the hierarchy operates on fragmented breath jurisdiction, Christ's registry authority overrides every level of fraudulent management. The ecclesia's legal petitions directly challenge the breath contract sustaining the hierarchy, releasing captives from their generational entanglements, nullifying occult filings, and reclaiming breath identity under the Father's ownership. Every time an individual repents, renounces occult oaths, and submits their breath back into registry containment under Jesus, the hierarchy's legal treasury shrinks. Its power diminishes not simply by prayer alone, but through courtroom transaction, the dismantling of breath contracts. The final collapse of the externalized hierarchy. At the final judgment, every breath fragment stored and trafficked by this government will be forcibly audited by the courts of heaven. The masters of wisdom, their human proxies, their hybrid priesthoods, and their synthetic breath projects will face full legal dismantling. The externalized hierarchy will not be allowed to move mature into permanent dominion. Its momentary rise will be met by the Lamb's registry audit, collapsing its breath economy entirely. The breath war formula of the externalized hierarchy is as follows: fragmented breath, hierarchy management, legal petition expansion, global governance, beast system enforcement. Jesus' counter formula: blood petition, registry restoration, contract nullification, hierarchy collapses, kingdom of heaven enforced. The 7 rays of global management. You've heard, what is his name? General Flynn speak in front of church about the 7 rays. The Lord, have your 7 rays watch over this church. Okay, that is Alice Bailey breath war. Kingdom of hell works, okay? The 7 rays of global management. The adversary's counterfeit kingdom is highly structured. Once the breath war shifted into organized management after the trafficking, fragmentation, and hybridization phases, the Luciferian priesthood established its governing arms. One of the most strategic frameworks revealed to Lucifer's initiates was the 7 rays, a system channeled through Alice Bailey as part of the externalized hierarchy, but long known to the fallen priesthoods. The 7 rays functions as administrative thrones of breath jurisdiction, each one assigned dominion over a key sector of global civilization. Though they are presented in mystical language in the public, in truth, these rays are legally managed breath management departments under the fallen thrones. The goal of this system is to fully fragment and administrate breath across every human domain until the entire population is absorbed into the counterfeit registry under the beast system. Ray number 1, the ray of will and power, the political throne. Ray 1 governs the consolidation of governmental authority, global leadership, and centralized power structures. Under this ray, breath fragmentation occurs through national identity, bloodline rulership, wars, and state sovereignty. Political oaths, constitutions, secret alliances, and hybridized monarchies serve as breath contracts, binding entire populations to governmental principalities. Breath fragmentation is harvested through mass bloodshed, conquest, and loyalty-based consent to rulers who sit as proxies for Lucifer's thrones. Ray number 2, the ray of love, wisdom, the religious throne. Ray 2 controls the dominion of religion and spiritual doctrine. This ray administers the Gnostic inversion and the redefinition of sin as awakening. Breath fragments are harvested as humans voluntarily submit to false spiritual coverings, ecumenical mergers, ascension teachings, and counterfeit salvation structures. The hybrid priesthoods of global religion acts as managers of this ray, siphoning breath through worship, interfaith agreements, and the absorption of multiple belief systems into a centralized apostate faith. Number 3, ray. The ray number 3, the ray of active intelligence, the financial throne. Ray 3 governs economics, finance, and commerce. Under this ray, breath is fragmented through debt slavery, fiat currency manipulation, global trade networks, and wealth consolidation. The breath economy flows through international banking dynasties who act as legal managers of financial contracts, binding entire nations to Lucifer's economic order. Every breath contract tied to debt, taxation, and monetary systems sustains this ray's dominion. Ray number 4, the ray of harmony through conflict, the war engine throne. Ray 4 oversees global conflict cycles. This ray sustains the adversary's polarity management system where perpetual crisis, war, and division generates massive breath discharges. Every major war, social upheaval, cultural revolution, and geopolitical conflict serves this ray by fragmenting breath through trauma, fear, and national strife. Leviathan operates heavily in this ray, twisting language, communication, and national identities into continual enmity that sustains breath fragmentation. Ray number 5, the ray of concrete science, the transhuman throne. Ray 5 governs the scientific sector, particularly the hybridization and synthetic breath agenda. This ray oversees biotechnology, AI, quantum computing, synthetic biology, CRISPR gene editing, and neural interfacing. Under this ray, breath fragmentation accelerates as humanity consents to technological modifications of the vessel itself, offering their breath jurisdiction to synthetic platforms under consent-based legal fraud. This is the spearhead of the adversary's attempt to create post-human breath surrogates for disembodied occupancy. Ray number 6 is the ray of devotion and idealism, the mass psychological throne. Ray 6 manages emotional manipulation, social engineering, and collective belief systems. This ray operates through mass media, containment propaganda, and psychological warfare. Breath is fragmented through sustained fear cycles, social movements, celebrity idolatry, identity politics, and emotional attachments to counterfeit narratives. Jezebel operates strongly in this ray, drawing breath through false emotional devotion while reshaping the moral compass of entire populations. Ray number 7, the ray of ceremonial order and magic, the occult priesthood throne. Ray 7 oversees the priesthood of ritual, ceremony, blood sacrifice, and legal contract enforcement. This is the central administrative ray through which breath trafficking is organized and sealed through formal oaths, initiations, sacrifices, and generational covenants. The black nobility, Freemasonry, Theosophy, Kabbalah, and ancient priesthoods all operate under this ray, acting as legal managers of the breath contracts that feed all the other rays. The false Christ as world teacher. At the apex of the counterfeit kingdom's breath war, the breath war system stands the adversary's ultimate legal weapon, the false Christ, also called in occult systems the world teacher or Maitreya. As first codified by Alice Bailey and her fallen guides, this being is not simply a political figure or religious leader. He is designed to function as the false registry administrator. Remember, there's two registries. There's God's, which is the book of life, and then there's Satan's, which is the book of the dead. Not the Egyptian book of the dead. The counterfeit redeemer who claims to unify fragmented breath under a single global system offering restoration while actually finalizing humanity's total legal enslavement under Lucifer's counterfeit dominion. Where the true Christ came to restore breath legally through blood, registry reinstatement, and courtroom petition, the false Christ will present a fraudulent reconciliation model that bypasses blood and replaces grace with system management or managed containment. This is the final legal assault on the adversary's attempt to fully transfer breath ownership into his counterfeit registry, forever severing it from heaven's authority. The legal function of the world teacher. The false Christ will operate as, first, the counterfeit reconciler, promising global peace, unity, and breath healing after centuries of trauma, war, fear, and fragmentation engineered by the adversary himself. Second, the synthetic registry manager, establishing a centralized breath identity system through digital biometric control, AI integration, transhuman bodily modification, and quantum financial systems that tie breath authorization to the beast's mark. Third, the unifying mediator of the seven rays, pulling together every administrative ray of the counterfeit kingdom through politics, religion, finance, science, media, ritual priesthoods, and psychological governance, all into one centralized breath management structure under his authority. Fourth, the final legal petition, becoming the adversary's ultimate courtroom argument, where he says, "Behold, humanity has chosen my son as their reconciler. They no longer desire registry restoration through your blood, but through my system of healing and ascension. The breath belongs to my kingdom now." Well, the psychological seduction of the world teachers is this. The false Christ's appeal will not be brutality, but compassion. He will present himself as the solution to the very breath war his kingdom created, healing collective trauma through global peace initiatives, offering financial equality through universal income and debt forgiveness, but legally tied to breath submission via the mark, promoting spiritual unity through the blending of all religious systems into a false ecumenical order, and advancing human potential through transhuman upgrades framed as divine evolution, eliminating fear by offering complete societal security as the price of the registry ownership transferred under his system. You see, it could be that Trump's setting this all up for this entire system, under the whole Q thing, etc., if that's even real, which I don't think it is. But regardless, this book that I wrote, The Breath War, it's a marvelous piece of work, I have to tell you, because it's like making sense, you know. And when I put it out a year ago, I was just so angry at the devil, dude. I was researching everything I could, and well, this is what came out. The world will not see rebellion in him, the Antichrist. They will see restoration, the counterfeit breath restoration that bypasses registry ownership and offers temporary peace while permanently surrendering legal breath authority into Lucifer's treasury. The legal core of the deception. At its heart, the false Christ represents the adversary's most sophisticated courtroom strategy. It says to heaven, "They have chosen registry restoration without you. They have consented to new breath containment under my administration." This is what Satan's telling the court. "I do not steal breath. I receive it by global consent." This allows the adversary to attempt a full registry override by human legal contract rather than by forced dominion. The infrastructure that prepares his throne. The legal machinery we have already exposed in my codex, which I've told you guys about in my past shows, really prepares this false Christ's arrival. The externalized hierarchy, Alice Bailey, establishes the governing priesthood. The 7 rays administrate breath fragmentation across every global system. The AIB system prepares the synthetic breath management network. The hybrid bloodlines secure biological anchoring for fallen spirits. And the transhumanist movement offers post-human breath surrogacy, while the global trauma cycles generate widespread desire for healing and peace. Everyone wants that now, right? Well, by the time the world teacher is revealed, most of humanity will have breath fragments entangled across every one of these rays, these 7 rays simultaneously, ensuring mass consent to his dominion under the appearance of peace, justice, unity, and ascension. Jesus' legal supremacy over the false prophet. The true Christ's legal work renders the false Christ permanently inferior, whereas the false Christ will offer contractual breath restoration through technology and spiritual integration. The Lamb offers full registry reinstatement through his blood alone. The ecclesia carries the legal authority to expose and dismantle every contract the world teacher attempts to establish, not through force, but through courtroom override anchored to blood-sealed petitions. Those who remain sealed in the Lamb's Book of Life stand fully outside the world teacher's breath registry system. Though unable to buy, sell, or participate in the beast system, their breath remains fully contained under heaven's jurisdiction, permanently immune from the adversary's counterfeit court filings. The final courtroom judgment in the world of the world teacher. At the great court, when I say world teacher, that's what Alice Bailey calls it, in her 7 rays of power. What's up, Lindmerk? We're reading my book, The Breath War. So at the great courtroom session at the end of the age, this is judgment. Every breath contract signed under the false Christ system will be exposed as fraudulent. The entire synthetic registry built by AI, biometrics, and genetic modification will be dissolved. The externalized hierarchy, 7 rays, and counterfeit priesthood will be stripped of standing. Every disembodied principality and hybrid throne that upheld his government will be judged. And the Lamb will reclaim full ownership of the breath registry, purifying creation of all unauthorized occupancy. Revelations 19:20 describes this precise courtroom collapse. The beast, the false prophet, and their entire dominion thrown into the lake of fire, while registry ownership returns solely back to God. The breath war formula of the false Christ is breath fragmentation, legal management, synthetic registry, creation, global consent, false reconciliation, beast system enforcement. Jesus' counter formula is blood petition, registry restoration, contract dissolution, world teacher collapse, kingdom of heaven established. Psychological manipulation as breath control. At its core, the breath war is not simply an external legal system of contracts, rituals, or bloodline trafficking. It is also a war for internal legal consent. The ongoing surrender of breath fragments through manipulated thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. While legal breath contracts are forged through formal covenants, the psychological manipulation serves as a constant daily siphon, a microfragmentation system that drains breath energy in real time by directing attention, emotion, and identity into the adversary's jurisdiction. Kind of like every day when you wake up and you see the news and you see the wars and you hear of China and Russia and America all going to have a World War III. Well, all of that fear and worry that you're not putting into the kingdom of Christ, well, you're giving little pieces of your spark of life, the breath of life, little pieces of God to use as batteries for Satan and his people. Every thought, every emotional attachment, every false identity agreement becomes a breath exchange when it aligns with the adversary's counterfeit legal system. In the courts of heaven, the adversary presents not only major contracts, but also countless accumulated microfilings based on the continuous emotional and intellectual participation of humanity in his system, which we're in right now. The legal mechanism of psychological breath control. Psychological manipulation allows the adversary to access breath through, first, emotional discharge, generating continual emotional states through fear, anxiety, rage, lust, grief, hopelessness, pride, which release small units of breath fragmentation as humans emotionally consent to his narratives. Second, through identity confusion. This is a big one. counseling individuals to anchor their identity in false narratives through gender confusion, self-deification, self-condemnation, victimhood, pride movements, which fragment breath alignment with registry identity. Third, narrative ownership, controlling the global storylines through media, education, entertainment, propaganda that establish continual breath surrendering agreements as people emotionally attached to counterfeit narratives. Fourth, mental exhaustion, overwhelming the mind with data, noise, distraction, and confusion, making it easier for humans to consent to breath fragmenting agreements out of mental weariness. Fifth, language engineering, subtly altering the meaning of words, truth, love, freedom, tolerance, justice, so that verbal agreements become disguised breath contracts submitted under redefined terminology. In every case, the adversary's goal is not simply deception, but breath leakage through voluntary participation in these thought structures. How psychological breath control feeds the breath economy. The adversary uses psychological manipulation to maintain a steady baseline breath harvest through news cycles, which triggers emotional discharges, through social media promoting envy, rage, tribalism, and identity polarization, through entertainment hijacks, desire, fantasy, and self-worth, through educational system programs of the Gnostic self-ascension doctrines into children. False religious systems promote guilt, striving, and legalism, and psycho-spiritual movements encourage identity alignment with hybridized ascension narratives. The breath released through these systems is then legally petitioned as jurisdictional gain. Satan says, hey, they have freely consented to my system emotionally, intellectually, and by identity. Well, the role of Jezebel, Leviathan, and Mammon in psychological breath control, well, these ancient principalities serve as specialized breath managers. Jezebel seduces breath through identity, inversion, emotional control, and false worship. Leviathan twists communication, fosters confusion, and manipulates conflict narratives. Mammon entices breath through economic identity, consumerism, and self-worth tied to wealth and status. Each operates as a breath filtration system, drawing fragmented breath upward into the adversary's treasury through continual psychological surrender. The legal sophistication of this strategy. Unlike direct blood contracts, psychological manipulation allows the adversary to harvest breath while bypassing the awareness of his victims. This grants him legal filings that appear fully voluntary. They willingly attached their identity to my narratives. They emotionally consented to my definitions. Their breath stands within my legal system by their thoughts, not by force. Again, Satan, the deceiver. That makes psychological breath control of one of the most resilient and legally defensible systems the adversary operates. Jesus' legal remedy against psychological breath control. Well, the work of Christ provides full legal reversal to these breath manipulations. The blood of the Lamb restores not only formal registry breaches, but also thought-based consent agreements. Though through repentance and legal petitions, the ecclesia is empowered to sever emotional breath leaks tied to fear, trauma, lust, and anger, to reclaim identity alignment to the original registry assigned sealed in Christ, to nullify narrative-based breath contracts established through propaganda and false education, to break generational agreements tied to psychological manipulation within family systems, and to petition the courts of heaven for full breath reintegration under Jesus' legal containment. 2 Corinthians 10:5 provides the operating formula. Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. This is not simply spiritual discipline, guys. It is legal breath reclamation. The ecclesia's courtroom role in psychological deliverance. Well, the remnant, you guys, must actively identify personal and corporate breath leaks tied to thought manipulation, renounce emotional contracts made through manipulated identity structures, petition for the dismantling of national-level narrative breath contracts filed in the adversary's courtrooms, release truth decrees that reestablish registry alignment over entire populations trapped in psychological breath systems. As these petitions succeed, the breath economy weakens and the enemy's legal filings lose daily jurisdictional power. The final collapse of psychological breath systems. At the final courtroom session, every narrative system, propaganda engine, and identity fraud structure will face full audit. Every breath fragment released through psychological consent will be reclaimed or permanently severed based on registry status. The Jezebel Leviathan Mammon structure will lose all breath harvesting jurisdiction, and the registry will be purified with thought, identity, and breath fully restored under the Lamb's dominion. The breath war formula of psychological breath control is as follows: narrative manipulation, thought consent, emotional discharge, microfragmentation, legal petition expansion, Luciferian dominion. Jesus' counter formula is blood petition, thought captivity, identity restoration, contract dissolution, and kingdom of heaven enforcement. Ritual infrastructure, according to Allan Kardec, Spiritism as spiritual economy normalization. Once the adversary had established the core mechanisms of breath fragmentation, trafficking, and administrative control, he needed a public-facing system to begin normalizing breath theft as a legitimate spiritual practice. This is where Spiritism, as codified by Allan Kardec, entered the battlefield. In the 19th century, Kardec formalized what had long been practiced secretly within the Luciferian priesthood: the ritual infrastructure that allows disembodied spirits or unclean breath fragments, like Nephilim demons, fallen watchers, to interact with and manipulate the living without legal embodiment. Through Spiritism, the adversary offered humanity consented participation in breath trafficking under the guise of spiritual enlightenment, healing, and communication with deceased loved ones. Well, we know what the Bible says. Don't talk to the dead. The core legal mechanism of Spiritism. Kardec's Spiritism functioned as a legal interface system between two classes of breath vessels. First, the living. Lawful breath holders still attached to their registry assignments. Second, the disembodied, unlawful breath fragments or unclean spirits or disincarnate entities seeking legal access to physical reality through human agreement. The Spiritist practice of mediumship created consent-based breath conduits that allowed disembodied entities to legally interface with living vessels, not by force, but by mutual contract. Through seances, channeling, automatic writing, and psychic communication, these rituals became legal portals through which breath fragments trapped in disembodiment could momentarily occupy or influence breath-bearing humans, thereby circumventing their legal exile from embodiment. Why Spiritism was legally effective? The genius of Kardec's system was its voluntary legal access point. It did not require blood pacts, murder, or high-level priesthood initiation. Instead, it offered emotional seduction. Things like you can speak to your deceased loved ones. You can receive guidance from higher ascended spirits. You can heal unresolved grief and receive wisdom from beyond. You are helping wandering souls to find peace. Well, in truth, these interactions allowed the adversary to create breath leakage from the living through emotional attachment to false spirits, to harvest consent-based access to the living vessel for disembodied spirits, to normalize breath trafficking as socially acceptable spiritual practice, and to expand legal petition filings in heaven's courts. The devil would say, hey, they willingly opened their breath containers to my fragmented agents. There was no force involved. How Spiritism expanded the breath economy. Through Kardec's model, the adversary industrialized the management of disembodied breath fragments through mass seance and public mediumships as created scalable breath interfaces. Through entire families, often for generations, became dedicated breath conduits for disembodied spirits. Spiritual churches institutionalized these practices, embedded breath economy participation into religious culture. And legal contracts were established between the living and unclean spirits through continuous consent-based sessions. Well, this allowed the adversary to massively expand his trafficking operation, particularly in Brazil, Europe, the Caribbean, and even portions of the Catholic and Protestant world, under the facade of light work and divine communication. Well, the true nature of spirits in Kardec's system is as follows. Though presented as the souls of departed loved ones, the entities channeled through Spiritism were rarely the dead. Instead, they were disembodied Nephilim. These are the unclean spirits in Enoch and Matthew. Fallen watchers seeking influence through human interface. Hybridized breath fragments still under the adversary's treasury. regional principalities masquerading as guides to secure national and racial breath assignments. Next time you go and see one of these channelers like Bashar, listen to them. Are they talking about breath fragmentation, breath harvesting, taking our breath? Why do they want our breath? Oh, you gotta meditate. Breathe in and breathe out. Open up your chakras. The legal interaction between the living and the entities perpetuated breath entanglement contracts, which allowed the adversary to argue for sustained jurisdiction over entire bloodlines, cities, and nations. Spiritism as a gateway into the broader breath war infrastructure is as follows. Kardec's model laid the legal groundwork for future expansions of breath economy systems. It normalized breath sharing between dimensions, or the key hybridization of transhuman neural interfacing. It softened global populations to embrace channeling, New Age ascension doctrines that we hear now, and ascended master systems. It prepared the public consciousness for AI-driven ancestral interfaces where digital necromancy will soon replicate these ancient breath crimes through synthetic channels. And it contributed directly to the formation of the externalized hierarchy by creating emotionally compliant populations familiar with spiritual mediation through the fallen. Christ's legal supremacy over spiritism. The work of Jesus completely dismantles Spiritism's breath trafficking system. Under registry authority, the dead have no jurisdictional access to the living. Hebrews 9:27 declares that it is appointed unto men to die once, and after this the judgment. Well, the dead do not roam, guide, or interface. Only disembodied frauds attempt to secure illegal access through spiritist rituals. The blood of Christ severs these breath-sharing contracts. The ecclesia is empowered to renounce all generational spiritist covenants, sever emotional breath ties to disembodied spirits masquerading as loved ones, shut down dimensional access points created by spiritist rituals, reclaim all breath fragments surrendered through the agreements back into the registry containment, the final judgment of spiritist infrastructure. At the end of the age, every breath fragmented trafficked through spiritist consent will face courtroom audit. Every disembodied entity that participated will be assigned to permanent judgment, and the false priesthood of spiritism will collapse. The breath registry will be fully purified and closed to further illegal interaction between realms. And the disembodied breath fragments like the Nephilim, the Watchers, hybrids will be permanently removed from the registry space, and humanity's breath economy will be sealed under Jesus Christ alone. The breath war formula of spiritism is as follows. Disembodied fragments, emotional seduction, voluntary consent, breath interface, legal petition, expansion, Luciferian dominion. Christ's counterformula, blood petition, contract renunciation, dimensional closure, breath restoration, kingdom of heaven enforcement. Mediumship as breath transfer protocols. Hey, have any of you guys read this book? I got 15 people watching here. Any of you have read this? Let me know. In the adversary's legal structure, mediumship, this is channeling. Okay, channeling spirits, functions as one of the primary breath interface systems that allows his disembodied agents, fallen watchers, Nephilim spirits, hybrids, and fragmented souls to temporarily interface with living, breathing vessels through legal consent-based breath sharing. Sharing! This is not merely communication. It is an illegal form of temporary embodiment where fragmented or fallen breath gains lawful access to the physical realm by invitation. While breath remains fully owned by God, the adversary's entire kingdom operates on fragmented breath, and his disembodied agents are permanently banned from lawful embodiment due to their registry exclusion. Mediumship provides them the only viable access to interact with the material realm without possessing a fully authorized vessel, exploiting voluntary transfer protocols which human mediums initiate. The legal mechanics of breath transfer via mediumship. Mediumship functions on strict legal structures that mimic law breath issuance protocols, but under counterfeit authorization. The core steps are, first, initiation of interface. The medium opens a legal invitation through ritual, desire, or emotional intention to allow non-embodied breath fragments to interface with their vessel. This is typically framed as spiritual communication, ancestral contact, or channeling, or for wisdom. Second, the voluntary breath sharing. The medium allows the external entity to partially interface with their breath field. This is not full possession, which requires deeper breaches, but a temporary consent-based merging of breath layers, granting the disembodied spirit access to vocal cords, nervous systems, and mental faculties. Third, dimensional bridging. The breath sharing allows disembodied spirits trapped in dimensional exile to temporarily express themselves into the physical plane, gaining emotional, energetic, and legal sustenance from the interface. Fourth, legal filing. The adversary presents these voluntary sessions before the heavenly courts. He says, hey, they have willingly allowed my agents to share their breath space. And he says, hey, this consent gives me lawful occupancy within their dominion. And it also says, hey, why the adversary, that's what he says, why the adversary designed mediumship as a breath transfer system. Well, the breath war's greatest limitation for the adversary is that his disembodied spirits cannot lawfully incarnate. Mediumships temporarily circumvent this by allowing real-time legal interaction between forbidden entities and breath-bearing humans, harvesting emotional breath fragments from the medium and participants during sessions, generating fresh consent contracts with each invocation, reinforcing legal claims over bloodlines, households, and entire regions. Oh, and by the way, this should explain ghosts. This should explain why people see some, why people talk to them, why they are human, they don't sound demon. They're just lost breath fragments that hasn't been pulled and siphoned yet by the fallen. Training entire generations to normalize breath trafficking, preparing for more advanced hybrid breath interfaces such as AI channeling, which is coming. AI channeling. Believe it or not, guys, you're going to have an app that'll talk to the dead through AI. No joke. Virtual reality possession and neural interface spirit hosting. Well, the breath fragmentation engine within mediumship. Every mediumship session results in cumulative breath leakage. Each interaction produces microfragmentation of the medium's breath identity, emotional attachment fragmentation for participants who believe they're contacting lost loved ones, bloodline breath entanglements that pass to future generations, and open spiritual doorways that grant lower-level demonic networks sustained access to family lines. Over time, mediums who repeatedly engage in breath transfer often suffer increasing fragmentation, mental instability, and physical deterioration. This is why the army had to stop it. They couldn't get the devil to help them by, conquering. But not simply due to possession, but because their breath vessel is continually drained of jurisdictional containment. The broader ritual infrastructure mediumship supports mediumship serves as a core operational tool that feeds multiple layers of the breath trafficking systems. It maintains regional breath markets for principalities overseeing cities, nations, and industries. It creates steady consent-based filings that reinforce the adversary's legal petitions in heaven. It helps establish early training for higher-level occult initiates who later enter blood-based priesthoods managing larger breath contracts. And it spiritually prepares populations to consent to more sophisticated future breath transfer systems tied to AI embodiment, transhuman neural integration, and synthetic soul hosting. The false narrative that shields mediumship. The adversary hides the legal nature of mediumship behind emotional deception. He says, we are only helping lost souls, or we bring closure to grieving families, or we are healing unresolved spiritual wounds, or we are serving as bridges of light between realms. Those should be, this is kind of like the Chris Bledsoe thing. I believe he's talking with demonic forces. In reality, these narratives serve to disguise breath fragmentation as love, bypassing the natural grief cycle God designed while strengthening the adversary's treasury of consent. The Christ-centered legal response to mediumship. The cross fully overrides every breath contract formed through mediumship. Through proper legal petition, every breath transfer agreement can be severed and breath fragments fully restored into registry containment under Christ's blood. The ecclesia's authority includes renouncing personal or generational participation in mediumship rituals, nullifying all breath-sharing contracts forged through spiritist practices, severing dimensional access points between disembodied spirits and breath-bearing humans, reclaiming all breath fragments siphoned through emotional or ritual consent, petitioning heaven's courts to permanently close these legal breath bridges across families, communities, and nations. The final courtroom judgment on mediumship. At the conclusion of the breath war, every mediumship session ever conducted will face courtroom audit. Every disembodied entity that trafficked breath through these rituals will be judged. Every redeemed breath contract formed through these sessions will be nullified or permanently severed. The priesthood of mediumship will collapse as legal occupancy is revoked, and the entire dimensional bridge between disembodied spirits and the living will be permanently sealed. Reincarnation as breath recycling scheme. From the moment God breathed into man, registry law was established: one issuance, one lifetime, one judgment. As Hebrew 9:27 states, it is appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment. Not to live again and then die again. Okay? Once to die and after this judgment. That means there is no reincarnation. Breath was never designed to cycle through multiple embodiments. Each breath vessel exists as a legal registry assignment, a sealed issuance under heaven's sovereignty authority. Yet the adversary, unable to create breath, devised a counterfeit system that simulates breath reissuance. This system of reincarnation allows him to recycle fragmented breath identities, laundering breath fragments through generations while presenting it as spiritual evolution. At the legal core of reincarnation lies fragmentation. Through trauma, sin, bloodline contracts, and occult ritual, breath fragments are severed from full registry containment and collected into the adversary's treasury. These fragments are then reassigned to future vessels, often through genetic lines or spiritual initiation. Under the false reappearance of past life's identity, the living vessel, unaware of the legal breach, emotionally consents to these inherited fragments, believing that they are carrying unresolved karmic debts for former embodiments. Well, each acceptance forms new consent-based contracts, creating fresh legal petitions for the adversary in heaven's court. Reincarnation allows the adversary to retain breath fragments indefinitely. Rather than releasing breath fragments into God's judicial process, they remain trapped in generational cycles, bound by emotional attachments, false memories, and spiritual deception. The doctrine of karma justifies this recycling scheme, convincing victims that continuous embodiment is necessary for spiritual purification. In reality, this system deepens their legal entanglement, preventing registry restoration and extending the adversary's dominion indefinitely. As hybrid bloodlines evolve, breath recycling became more sophisticated. Bloodlines rich in breath fragments accumulated immense spiritual authority as each generational layer compounded the treasury of trafficked breath. These ancient lineages serve as living vaults of recycled breath, sustained occult dominions for centuries. Through these families, recycled breath fragments are assigned to political rulers, priest kings, and financial elites, feeding the adversary's breath economy across multiple rays of global management. This is what I believe happened with the Orsinis and Breakspears 250 years ago somehow. The Orsinis received enough breath fragments to take over the Breakspear power of Europe. With the rise of transhumanism, the reincarnation model is now being technologically repackaged. Digital consciousness uploads, AI-managed identity programs, synthetic avatars, and neural interfacing are the next stage of breath recycling. Quantum computing systems will soon simulate ancestral identity blending, allowing future populations to carry fabricated composite breath profiles as synthetic spiritual inheritance. This synthetic breath recycling model seeks to permanently sever the final breath fragments from registry restoration by transforming identity into programmable, transferable digital property. The emotional appeal of reincarnation remains one of its most dangerous features. It seduces billions by offering endless second chances while removing the fear of judgment. It allows individuals to believe they are improving spiritually, evolving upward through their own merit, while bypassing Christ's blood altogether. In this way, reincarnation strengthens the Gnostic conversion, replacing grace with knowledge, ascension, and self-directed breath evolution. Each emotional attachment to a supposed past life becomes a renewed breath contract voluntarily submitted to the adversary's legal system. The blood of Christ permanently dismantles every breath recycling contract. His cross seals registry assignments, collapsing every fraudulent reincarnation identity. Through the courts of heaven, the ecclesia may petition for the full severing of reincarnation agreements. The retrieval of breath fragments is reassigned through false past lives, and the restoration of breath identity back to its original issuance. Generational breath debts, inherited karmic burdens, and composite identity structures are all subject to legal dissolution under Christ's superior blood authority. At the final judgment, every breath recycling contract will face full audit. All trafficked fragments falsely reassigned will be gathered and sorted under heaven's registry ownership. Every principality, hybrid bloodline, occult priesthood, or disembodied entity who trafficked recycled breath will be stripped of standing. The adversary's entire synthetic registry system built on reincarnation and hybrid breath laundering will collapse as Christ reclaims full ownership of the breath registry. No recycled breath identity will survive registry adjudication, and every fragment will either be restored under the Lamb or permanently separated from creation forever. Forever. Science and the spirits replacing sin and judgment. At the foundation of God's courtroom system stands the immutable reality of sin, righteousness, and judgment. Breath, once issued, is evaluated according to registry law, every soul accountable before the throne of God for its legal standing. Sin is not merely moral failure, it is a jurisdictional breach against breath issuance authority, triggering legal filings in heaven's courts. Judgment is the unavoidable courtroom consequence of unrepented breath violation. The adversary, unable to directly abolish the courtroom system, devised an alternative framework, a spiritualized science that eliminates the courtroom altogether by redefining both sin and judgment into mechanical processes of spiritual law, breath evolution, and karmic balancing. This system removes the priesthood of God as judge and replaces him with impersonal forces of spiritual law that manage breath progression apart from registry containment. The courtroom disappears, only the system remains, and the legal mechanics of replacing sin and judgment, well, this breath war mechanism functions by several coordinated legal inversions. First, sin is reframed as ignorance or imbalance rather than rebellion. Wrongdoing becomes a state of incomplete knowledge rather than legal violation against divine registry law. Second, judgment is replaced with natural consequences or karmic correction rather than divine courtroom sentencing. Breath breaches are seen as self-correcting through multiple embodiments or vibrational recalibration. And third, redemption is no longer a legal blood transaction, but as a process of personal growth, higher knowledge, and energetic refinement across lifetimes or ascension initiations. Fourth, grace is entirely removed as unnecessary. Instead, breath restoration becomes a function of spiritual laws governed by ascended masters, cosmic hierarchies, or energy fields. The adversary's legal filings present this to heaven as this. They say, they have rejected your courtroom. They no longer recognize sin as legal breach. They seek restoration through my administrative systems of ascension and balance. They consent to my governance outside your registry authority. The operational framework behind this replacement. Well, the adversary's science of spirits model is embedded throughout multiple global systems. In Spiritism and Kardec's model, sin is explained as imperfection rather than rebellion, with reincarnation providing endless opportunities for refinement. In Gnosticism, ignorance of divine selfhood replaces moral accountability, making enlightenment the solution rather than repentance. In New Age doctrines, vibrational alignment, frequency management, and energy clearing substitute for registry restoration. In transhumanism, genetic and technological perfection becomes means to eliminate human flaws entirely. In Theosophy and Bailey's externalized hierarchy, sin is redefined as resistance of spiritual evolution, while cosmic law replaces God's personal judicial authority. In secular psychology, sin is reduced to a mental illness, trauma response, or social dysfunction requiring therapy, not courtroom petition. Each system replaces legal breath violation with systemic adjustment, eliminating the legal courtroom altogether from the consciousness of the masses. Why this system is so legally dangerous? Well, this mechanism does not operate through overt rebellion, but through consent-based legal disqualification. Humanity voluntarily agrees that there is no sin requiring blood atonement. They consent to breath management through scientific or mystical correction systems. They align their identity to systems outside of heaven's registry jurisdiction. They permit the adversary to argue. He says, they denied the authority of your court. They have surrendered their breath governance to my cosmic order. Well, in this way, entire populations become legally inaccessible to heaven's courts. Not because God is absent, but because humanity stands outside jurisdiction by consent. The breath economy function of the science of spirits. By removing legal judgment, the system allows breath fragmentation to continue indefinitely. The breath economy remains fully operational as breath fragments recycle through artificial correction cycles. No courtroom petition interrupts the adversary's breath treasury because no repentance is filed. Generational breath trafficking compounds exponentially as individuals accept synthetic restoration models. The breath war remains frozen in legal suspension while the adversary harvests fragments across endless cycles of consent-based management. Jesus' legal supremacy over the science of spirits. The cross stands as the permanent legal contradiction to this entire system. Whereas the science of spirits eliminates legal judgment, the cross confronts the core breach directly. Hebrews 9:22 says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. Christ's blood fully satisfies registry law, nullifies all counterfeit correction models, and reinstates breath under the Father's direct ownership. Through proper legal petition, the ecclesia can renounce every consent-based contract made under ascension, karma, energy healing, or vibrational self-justification, can dismantle breath contracts tied to false spiritual laws, can sever generational breath recycling assignments, reclaim breath fragments entangled in artificial systems of cosmic law, petition for a complete courtroom reinstatement under the Lamb's authority. The final courtroom judgment of the sciences of the spirits. At the final courtroom, every breath identity hidden behind energy management, ascension models, or karmic correction will face full legal audit. All administrative systems replacing sin with scientific progress will collapse. The externalized hierarchies priesthood managing these systems will lose all jurisdictional authority. Every fragment will be judged directly under registry law by the Lamb, not by the energetic balance. And the adversary's entire system or synthetic correction economy will be dismantled forever. Intellectual architecture. Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Dismantling of biblical Christ as historical person. Well, at the legal core of the breath war, the most terrifying threat to the adversary's dominion is not simply Jesus as a moral teacher, philosopher, or a mythological symbol. It is Jesus as a literal incarnated person who bore legal breath, fulfilled the registry law, and offered his blood in substitutionary payment for humanity's breath violations. Well, this is the center of registry restoration. Alvin Boyd Kuhn's intellectual architecture was specifically designed to attack this legal mechanism by dismantling the personhood of Christ and replacing him with a purely symbolic Christ principle, a universal cosmic energy that exists within all men, requiring no incarnation, no blood sacrifice, no legal judgment, and no courtroom petition. This framework did not simply create theological confusion, it provided the adversary a powerful legal argument. They say to God, hey, their Redeemer was never real, there was no incarnated registry assignment, there was no valid blood contract, their breath remains unreconciled. While the legal mechanics behind Kuhn's strategy is as follows. Kuhn's work functioned as a highly refined intellectual weapons system with several legal objectives. First, elimination of incarnation. Kuhn denied that Christ physically incarnated as a man in history. The registry issuance of breath of the Son of God, the second Adam, was erased in his framework. Second, erasure of legal substitution. If Christ was never incarnate, then he was never issued lawful breath, never placed under the law, never executed under jurisdiction, and thus never fulfilled legal substitutions for humanity's breath breaches. Third, redefinition of redemption. In Kuhn's system, salvation is, and this is all Christ consciousness that you're hearing now. That's Kuhn's system. Third, redefinition of redemption. In Kuhn's system, salvation is not registry restoration, but awakening to one's inner divinity, a pure Gnostic conversion that bypasses legal breath covering. Fourth, destruction of the courtroom. Without a literal incarnated Redeemer, the courtroom itself becomes unnecessary. Breath restoration is framed as personal enlightenment, not judicial transaction. Fifth, sovereign identity realignment. Humanity is repositioned as a co-divine, naturally containing the Christ principle within, further deepening consent-based disqualification from the heavenly court. How Kuhn's architecture fits the broader breath war. Kuhn's intellectual framework plugged directly into the multiple breath war systems as it empowered the Gnostic conversion, knowledge over grace. It fueled Theosophy's spiritual evolution model. It justified spiritist breath transfer practices. It reinforced reincarnation as necessary for self-purification. It advanced transhuman doctrines of self-perfecting godhood. It trained entire theological branches to deny registry law and courtroom procedure entirely. By erasing the historical registry-assigned personhood of Christ, Kuhn's model directly disabled the only valid legal transaction capable of restoring breath identity. This is the true legal danger. Not merely that people are deceived, but that the breath fragments remain permanently trapped outside registry covering by intellectual consent. The adversary's courtroom argument based on Kuhn. In the courts of heaven, the adversary's legal petition operates like this. He says, hey, they don't believe their Redeemer was ever real. They reject the blood of a contract. They seek restoration through their own self-divinity. Their breath remains outside registry containment, and I maintain a lawful claim through unresolved jurisdictional breaches. Well, this is not overt rebellion. It is intellectual self-disqualification through consent. The psychological appeal of Kuhn's system. Kuhn's work, and I'm almost over, guys. I know this is a lot of stuff. Kuhn's work provides spiritual seduction by appealing to intellectual pride, offering salvation without submission or repentance, eliminating the offense of the cross, and allowing each person to believe that they already possess divine registry standing internally, granting freedom from moral accountability under courtroom judgment. Well, this allows highly educated, spiritually curious populations to remain fully trapped in the breath war while believing themselves spiritually superior to primitive Christians. Christ's legal supremacy over the intellectual architecture. Well, the cross remains the legal foundation that dismantles Kuhn's entire structure. The incarnation was not symbolic, it was courtroom action. John 1:14 declares, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Galatians 4:4-5 says, "God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law." These are not metaphors. They are legal protocols establishing registry issuance, lawful substitution, and valid breath ransom payment. Through the blood, the ecclesia retains courtroom authority to renounce all intellectual consent made to false Christ principles, sever contracts tied to Gnostic identity realignment, nullify generational breath contracts forged under symbolic Christ doctrines, reinstate breath identity under the historical legal personhood of Jesus Christ. And the final judgment of Kuhn's intellectual system is as follows. At the final courtroom, every breath fragment withheld under intellectual Gnosticism will be audited. All false Christ doctrines will be dismantled, and the registry will recognize only those breath vessels covered under the blood of the incarnated Son. The counterfeit priesthoods managing these false identities will lose all standing, and the adversary's legal filings based on symbolic Christ doctrines will be thrown out permanently. So the breath war formula of Kuhn's intellectual architecture is as follows. Hold on, I gotta see how much farther we gotta go here. This is just getting, This is a big, long chapter, by the way. Whew. Ooh. 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 Looks like I got another half an hour here. Ooh. I can only do 2 hours, dude. Otherwise, I am just tanked, tired. All right, guys. So, yeah, we're gonna stop it here. Okay. Yes. So we're gonna stop here at the cosmic Christ model and solar mythos. Okay. Because I can't do this anymore. Otherwise, it would take me another hour to get through to the next chapter. All right, guys. I think we're in chapter 7 or 8. I can't remember. I think we're in chapter 7, all the way up to 8, and which is good. We made big progress. So hopefully you guys have a pretty good idea now as to the breath war and its jurisdictional structure. All of this information came from esoteric Luciferian doctrine, how they are managing our breath. Now, they don't call it breath. They call it other things. They call it spirit. They call it loose. They call it other things. But our breath, when we exhale, they are using that as batteries for power over us, as a jurisdictional battery. It's like using God's power against God himself. It's a trip. But anyway, this has been Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Tune in tomorrow night when I do the rest of the book, I think. God bless you. God keep you. God thank you. And yeah, I should do a discussion time. Maybe we can do that one night after I'm done with this and we could just sit and talk about the book. But in all honesty, only a couple people would be asking questions. But anyway, if you want, you can email me at jamescarner.com. That's my email, me at jamescarner.com. I will answer your questions, okay? This has been Cause Before Symptom. See you guys mañana.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.